Hey everybody, I am Cinnamon Cooney, your Art Sherpa, and today is a wonderful day of painting. I'm going to show you step by step how you can create a pond scene with irises and light reflecting all over it. I have so many techniques and tricks to show you about painting flowers, painting diffused reflections on green water. Lots to go over. This is part of Acrylic April, so if you're into learning how to do this kind of landscape painting water and landscape, you would come to the right place. We're going every day, 30 paintings that sequentially lead into one another, each skill building on the next. Helping me do that is my husband, John.
Hello.
He makes sure that the cameras can see every part of the action, see every technique that I'm doing. Sometimes he reminds to ask me a question, make sure that I'm talking to you guys at home and remembering that beginner experience. Now, this lesson, if you just came by to do these irises, you're so welcome to do that. I think you're going to love it. It's a lot of fun. Lots of extra resources in the description below. Don't forget to go by the website. There's free downloadables, no drawing options, step-by-step mini books that you can download, a lot to help you succeed. If you want to take part of this 30-day painting program where you go every day and in 30 days paint better, I would love to invite you to do that. Be sure and hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment down below to tell me what you think of this and other painting stuff you might like to see. You need to get your paint, get your brushes, because I'm going to show you how to paint this iris pond. Come on. So today, like every day in April, our surface is an 8x8 stretch canvas. We have the wish and intention on here. May you bloom where you are planted, which is just one of my favorite sayings. I don't know what one of your favorite sayings is, John, but that's one of my favorite sayings.
That's a good saying.
It's a good saying. It's a very good saying. May you bloom where you were planted. And in art, I think it's to find your best technique in the moment that you're doing it and not put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect, but just discover yourself during the painting journey. I have the colors today for this fun little painting. Cad red. We don't really need a lot of cad red medium. This is I probably could have done just a smidge, but I felt like it would dry out on me by the time we got to it, so I put out a little more. Quin magenta, cad yellow medium, phthalo green, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, dioxazine purple, and Mars black. Now, as you're painting with me, it may be hard, and just try to keep in mind that this is the ultramarine blue, this is the phthalo blue, and these two sometimes can look black on the palette, but the one to the right is the purple, and the one to the left is the black. Woo! And I'm going to start out, I think, with my big number 26 brush. So you know what this means, John?
A big brush?
No, that means step one.
Oh, yeah, step one.
Step one.
You're going to use the big brush.
Yes, with
That's
the big
exciting.
brush. Step one. Step one today will feel very familiar to those of you who have done Acrylic April before, and it will be the easiest step in this painting because we're going to paint the whole surface a solid and deep color. And that's because there are a lot of similar colors in this painting, and we want to create depth. So the best way to do that is to do a ground. I'm going to take my big brush and get it just a little bit wet. This is a number 26 bright. The size of it doesn't really matter. You just want a brush that lets you put out paint in a comfortable way.
Can I ask you something about this big brush?
Yes.
Could you use like a house paintbrush?
I mean, as long as it didn't hold too much water, I think you really could.
So, yeah, I'm just curious.
I have to wonder if we should do a follow-up video where, like, I go to the hardware store and buy paintbrushes.
That may be something to throw into the...
into the things we check out just in case.
But I've seen a lot of folks asking, do I need this specific brush? Could I
Not
use
the
any brush?
specific one. You just want one that's big enough so you're not... If I were to paint this whole canvas with this brush... Or if I was to go like this could take a minute.
You'd be here for a while.
So if your goal is to try to participate in the daily painting part of Acrylic April, you might want to size up where you're comfortable with your big brushes. We're taking phthalo green and burnt sienna and just painting the whole background a very dark green. The darkest of greens. So many dark greens.
And is it important to get a fully covered field, or can it be brushy?
It can be brushy. It can be super brushy because we're really going to be painting so many layers over this. The irises and the water are going to be everywhere. Right? None of the background of the canvas will be really exposed. Little bits of it may pop through. And for the purposes of having a depth of color, it's nice to have it be this one color. And also, we're going to do a little bit of a sketch out. Like our paintings so far, you really haven't needed to, you have a traceable, but you probably haven't needed to use a traceable that much or worry about gridding yet, because a lot of landscaping sometimes is just finding the horizon.
Now, if we were going to be painting on a gallery wrap, is this the color we would want to paint around the edges?
This is the color. If you were going to paint all the sides, this is the color I definitely want to have. That way, if you bring any of your brush strokes around, you wouldn't have to worry about being too pretty with them. Oh. So it's a nice brown, green, brown, brown, green. Kermit would love this color.
I love it.
You love it? Really? Or are you just being agreeable because you're my co-host?
Why would I just be agreeable?
It would just be agreeable. The next most important step is to dry your surface, and then we will move on to step 2.
Okay.
So in step 2, we have to show a couple major sort of lines or structural spaces in this simplistic landscape. The first one, I'm going to come here just, down maybe 1.5 inches. I can even tell you probably exactly. All right. There we go. Right around the 1.5 inch space. And then if you imagine that we've divided this 8-inch canvas in half here, I would come up probably about to the 3-inch mark. And we're going to draw a diagonal shoreline. This part of the shoreline actually will come through almost starting here and come across all the way to the far corner. So it comes above our far shoreline. It'll be like plants and irises that are coming up here, but really the shape of our landscape is this. Believe it or not, this weird shape, this little triangle is not an uncommon landscape shape to see when you're doing water, when you're working streams, or even gardening landscapes. That's not uncommon. So when you have those 2 lines in, we're going to begin by, and I will just use, this is a hog brush. This is a number 8 Cambridge, but just any brush that you have that's a bright, that's kind of a little bit stiff and scratchy would be fine. And we're going to put in the loose background back there. In my loose background, I'm going to get my brown and green. And I'm going to kind of do some distant, dark little strokes. All right, little brown and green. Short strokes, kind of vertical. This sort of implies grass. Grass. This is the beginning of that impressionistic kind of thoughtfulness. We're not going to be that impressionistic, but it is part of that thinking. Sometimes I get more brown and more green. And the reason of that is, if you think about it, if you ever look at grass, it has a lot of tonality. For something that is all green, it has so much tonality. That green on green on green painting can be very, very frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
Going here. Just kind of coming along this line. Pulling that down in. All right. Now that you have that dark green there, you can come in with your brown and green and get just a smidge of your cad yellow and place kind of like a few strokes of distant out of focus light. This is almost a bokeh.
Oh, yeah. This is, it's very dark, but yet that yellow adds that little
little bit of light in the distance. We don't want to pull too much because we want to make our iris blades really stand out and come forward. So it's important to have a little dimensionality, but still have it deep enough that the blades of iris flower really, really show. I can come in and get a little more of my phthalo green and weave into this. It's not too much of a little weavy center, but it begins to be a start. I'm going to rinse out. And just to help this area kind of build up, I may even take a little of my burnt sienna over to my Mars Black, as you do. And make sure that along my bank, I have started to add this dark value. Now I'm going to tip my canvas just for my convenience.
Okay.
Right? So you guys kind of know it's oriented here. I'm going to bring that stroke across the whole thing. Notice it's a short thing. And it's not a tidy thing, which is sometimes why I like a bristle brush. And you can feather it a bit where this darkness will go into the iris blades. But this is going to help us set the bank of the stream right there. I don't even know if our step-by-step camera can even capture this.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But this is the next.
Very dark.
It's very dark. We're going to get a picture of it. Know that yours should be dark at home. But it should also feel kind of lush and rich to the eye. It's that balance of being dark but feeling lush to the eye. And we'll come back and I'll show you the next layer. We've got a distant bank of grass that's kind of a little bit out of focus. We've got a beginning shadow along our water bank. Now we need to put in a little bit of the rough water. It is not our finished water, but because we're going to want to match our flowers and everything up, down, and do some little fussy painting where it's together, because we've learned about how water makes a reflection, right? Water is a mirror and then it's impacted by wind and those things. So this is just a more close up expression of that concept. And, you know, in your water, you would see reflection of sky and all kinds of things around it. So it's a good thing to think of. I'm going to take my green and even a little bit of my ultramarine blue. And I'm going to come here and kind of wiggle out the start of what will be my water. Still pretty dark, right?
Yeah.
And I am kind of putting a wiggle stroke in. Got a little bit of the Monet going on in there. And that's because the water has a lot of depth to it. The reflection on it's pretty strong, and the ground underneath it, there's probably a lot of green and deep brown. So even though it's transparent, there's a lot going on both directions to deepen the water. And you'll find that often in these kinds of ponds. This is a slight wiggle. I'm not going wiggle, 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 wiggle. It's just slight. It's just slight. And come along the bank. And a lot of it is like you just see it in your eye a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while this is like this, I'm going to come and grab some of my cad yellow into my green and brown. It kind of makes an off color. And I'm going to pull some reflection down into it.
Oh, that's starting to bring the light in.
A little bit, perhaps coming forward. Just the beginnings. The reason I do some of this work early on instead of like after I have all my reeds on the far bank is you will want to put some of the reeds in. And as you do those brush strokes, if you remember how we did the reflections in those couple really strong reflection videos, or if you don't, you know what? I'm assuming that you're doing all the Acrylic April videos. If you're not, there's a sequence of videos that goes for 30 days. And you'll definitely want to check those out because they're really about helping you learn how to do all these skills. The skills build on each other. So I want to sim because maybe you're here just to paint irises with me, which is just fantastic. when objects are reflected, they make a mirror of each other. And we have to think about how that mirror happens in the water for the reflection to feel really valid. And you can paint something that's quite abstracted, but it'll feel quite real when it has that mirror there. It's okay, even if you get a little yellow in there like I am right now, how the brush is a little bit bristly, so it does some stuff.
Yeah.
That's all right. It's not hurting you. We're just kind of starting the little thoughtfulness of that. Just thinking about it. I can even come and get a little of my burnt sienna and quite a lot of my ultramarine blue. And white right there. See that right there? Mm-hmm. So that's burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and white. I'll just start to speak to that. And it's okay that it kind of has a little bit of that stroke and streakiness in it. We don't mind. And we may come back and even later accentuate some of that. And I think it's hard to overplay the water and the sky for it to feel like those things. So I'm just playing with that right now. Some of the paint is picking up, and that's okay. Because I can come back with green really easily. And paint into it, right? Mm-hmm. And pull this down into where we know the grass is going to go. It's pretty easy to put the cross bank coming back into my green and brown. A little bit into my green and brown. Starting to talk about how that is there. And I'm going to pull some of this back this direction. Little bit of pond water happening here. It is a good idea to rinse out and dry your surface at this stage, and then we'll start putting in some distant flowers. So we're still in the deep and murky green area. I will just remind myself, I'm going to bring my little chalk back here to remind myself I've got reeds coming through here. The reason I take the time to do this is to remember to bring my pond water to about a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch of where I expect my reeds to start being delicate on this side, right? So I just want a little room to be fussy and have fun with my greenery. Now, you can do the next with either a round or an angle. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch angle, and we're going to start putting in all the cool greenery that is the distant irises. So I'm going to bring my wonderful blades up.
Those are some very distant.
They're across the way. I'm starting with my deep color, which is just right now phthalo green. We will pay attention to how the light hits everything, and I may even come in and piece some stuff out with a little round brush. And you can do large, if you want to like pull up, see large areas where it might be thick on the reed. Mm-hmm. You can come in on the side of the brush, and then where you need to bring it out, you can do that quite easily. So far, just phthalo green. Phthalo green is a nice, deep chlorophyll color. I almost said chloroform. Chloroform?
Chloroform.
Chloroform. No chloroform.
That makes you go sleepy.
Don't use chloroform unless you're a medical trained professional. It's so funny. Like, I say those things and I just think to myself, if somebody was going to use it who wasn't a medical trained professional, would me saying it actually stop them? If it did, that would be kind of cool.
You should always be be concerned if someone walks up and says, "Does this smell like chloroform?"
Yeah. No. Don't test it for him. I'm just flicking the brush. On these types of brushes, if you're using a round, you want to stay on the toe. If you're using an angle, you want to start with the shortest bristles and finish with the longest. That's how you get the little flicking strokes of greenery. And then we're just putting a layer in. So you start making those marks. But believe it or not, we're going to get into much brighter greens as we go. Like there's some really wonderful little greens happening. Curving over in this area. I love to see where the light plays with things. Think about how far the light green might go down. This is just my cad yellow into my phthalo green. And my phthalo green may have been tinted a little bit with my burnt sienna from the mix. Sometimes there's a bunch of invisible painting that happens on an artist palette that we necessarily might forget to talk about. So I really try to talk about that as a teacher is the thing that you see, which is me mixing my cad yellow into my phthalo green. But what you might not have noticed is that my burnt sienna is still over there and may be tinting or knocking back the vibrancy of my color. I can always get a little more green in. So green on green is always a challenge to paint for everyone. And it's about the value. Think of it instead of a green on green painting, think of it as a monochromatic painting. Maybe a little more of the phthalo over here. And then you've got to remember that on these irises are like a clump.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're painting them, they'll be clumps together. Even though they may be fairly solid through an area. There's still kind of a clumping effect. We're kind of pulling a little green. Now I can kind of see some distant off a little bits there, right?
Yeah.
One fun thing that you wouldn't expect is I'm going to take a little of my cad red and a little of my cad yellow, kind of an orange, bring it into my burnt sienna. Little bits of this might be at the base towards the dark area of the bank. They don't go up too far. There's these little dead bits of plant life, debris.
Mm-hmm.
I like to also mix one with just a little more yellow into it. Speak to that a bit. This is also important because you will have in your water some of these colors. So even as you're going, you can add some touches of that little color. Bringing in little touches of what is up there reflected down into here. Like if I have a nice little bit that kind of comes up and over.
I might catch it in reflection.
Yeah, I want to see a little bit in the reflection. Just so that we're seeing both ways. I might get right into that yellow right there. Pull in some of that sunlight coming in on this side of the irises on that greenery. Defocus it. Bring some here. It's a thoughtful business.
Yeah.
Water reflections. I'm wiping out. Wipe out.
So very nice.
I'm also going to make sure that I kind of speak to what I have going on up here. Now, the water is ripply, so the reflections are not perfect. They're broken. That's why we sort of wiggled the line before. You don't have to be too perfect with those lines. When I come over to the side, I might get more into the phthalo green. I haven't rinsed out my brush, though. Might even sometimes come on the edge. And what you see me doing in the water is just making sure that I've got interesting reflections and they're not too in focus. We don't want them to be too in focus. This is especially important when we start putting flowers in because they can really take over what's happening with our flowers.
Mm.
I'm going to get a lot of yellow into my green. And even bring some white over to it. Catch little leaves that might be reflected there. You will see me pick up so many little bits of green. I'll switch over to maybe one of the things, again, silently you might not see me doing is switching to my point to create a thicker, kind of less edgy stroke that's a little less focused. That's how I'm getting the unfocused stroke coming on this side versus the much more focused stroke on the up area. Okay, if it's a dry brush too. The reason people just love to do this is because it's actually rather fun.
It is rather. Looks really cool.
You got to build it up. You got to take your time and get your green in there. Come back into my phthalo again. Sometimes pulling it down into the water. Could be quite into the water right there. And you can see we're starting to get some out of focus. Wonderful color in the water. And then I'll go back into this. Brushing it there. Blending it. Just blend. And we will, like when the flowers get in there, the little sort of out of focus flowers. So much fun. Sometimes I'll grab a little bit of sky color and blend that on in there. A lot to take in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's do one more little thing and then we'll call it a step.
Cool.
So in the water, definitely, it's quite dark. I'm going to take a little of my green and my ultramarine blue. I come along my bank, make sure that there's a dark edge. It's the shadow that we tend to get at the bank's edge. You can pop little bits of highlights into it. But you do want it to be noticeably and visibly a little dark. A little too much red. Luckily it's green, so we just blend that in there. Isn't that wild how we can?
Yeah.
And then back into the dark if we lose it. And then if you want to contrast that, you can come back with a little bit of the black. Maybe I'll take the brush on the edge and kind of flick that up just along the edge there. A couple places to make sure that our bank has a sort of dark story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing people don't think about, I'm taking ultramarine blue and white, is along the bank sometimes there are little pops of, what it is that the water is there and it's catching light.
Oh.
So you want to make sure that you've got some of that. We will call this a space and then come back and do a little more detailing. So at this stage, we get to do some fun and playful detailing on the far bank. I'm going to take a number 4 round and still mixing through some of my favorite greens that I have here. I'm going to take my cad yellow over to that little spot where I had phthalo green and a little white. And I might pull some reeds, not only deeply through this embankment, but maybe even onto the little water here, because they do tend to fall over. And that's kind of fun. We can play with that. Little white and yellow, and maybe pull some little reeds that are coming down. I guess these are leaves and stems. And I like this because it's not about making every single one exactly the same. It's about the totality of what we've got going on here. And you'll see me working through my greens. Sometimes it's a darker green, sometimes it's a lighter green. And you can use the reference to help guide you and also the step to know where that goes. Wherever you see these greens and these colors, what you're really talking about is areas where light is perhaps shining through the iris leaves. And that's really rather nice. You can always come over into I can take my green right over into my red. And that is another way to get brown. So we're actually, pulling some leaves that maybe go some different places. Distant bank, little bits of light, little bits of stuff. The other thing that I want to do is I want to take some white. And just between a few reeds, let a little bit of the light kind of sparkle. Not everything, just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and take a little black. Kind of come along a couple places that didn't have leaves going down. And maybe get a little of my blue and white. Speak to areas of the shore which maybe caught the light.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few distant little areas of the shore that maybe got some light. I can always come through and put browns in. I'm just coming in and adding a little color. So one of the things that I'll do, and you should do as you're thinking like an artist, that's painting landscapes, I'm weaving and dashing. Notice that I'm breaking my line. I'm not keeping regular lines. I'm just letting that line dance. And that is okay. Breaking the line is one of those things that can be good. Oh, that's a little too watery, so I'll move that. Because nature does that. Nature tries not to make patterns unless it's really trying to get our attention. A lot of times nature's trying to hide its patterns, saying, don't look at me. There's nothing happening here. I'm going to put some little pops of color a couple of places. That's always fun to do. Little bits. Changing it up. You'll see I wiggle these lines a bit because the water is a bit in motion. Bring some here. Play, 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 play. And it is good to keep it into your mind that you are playing. Try not to get too in your own head. I think ponds are really wonderful to paint because there's a bit of an abstract to them. Mm-hmm. And we always want to play with a little bit of our abstract. Now, at this point, I am pulling some of my more favorite green colors through the water with my number 4. Kind of looking for little places that I can add those and play with those. I try not to make patterns. Trying to make sure that I've got lots of deep shadows. There's lots and lots of through this piece. I'm going to take a little more of my green and ultramarine blue. Make sure there's deep shadows. Sometimes you can get a little burnt sienna into it too. And you're just wanting to make sure. This could be a tree. This could be a person in the bank breaking the light. I'm just wiggling this back and forth. You know, the thing to keep in mind is I'm grabbing ultramarine blue and titanium white, and you can even grab a little burnt sienna into it. You do want it to be quite light, though. The sky does reflect around branches of trees. Notice I'm going back where I had put some before. That's staying vertical enough for you guys to see. What do you think, John?
I think this is great.
Sometimes a little more blue. See little places that the sky might be peeking here. I'm also going to tap around little reflections in the water. Isn't that wonderful? And it does read as sky. And the more you paint like different little landscapes, the more you'll realize that ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna or burnt umber, either one really kind of works. And white does a pretty good summer sky reflection on water. I can make little dashes and little interesting marks to speak to what's happening here. You know, and then we can get back into the greens, right? Got to make sure I don't have so much water. What happens sometimes is when you rinse out your brush, a drop of water holds on the brush. And I always call it like the hidden drop. Sometimes they come down and cause trouble. And you can see I'm making sure that my water goes past that 1/4 inch edge that we talk about. So when our other reeds are happening, just mixing up my greens and making sure this pulls back. It's going to be super important back into this. And I'm really holding the brush to the side and I'm just letting this dance around. When I put these other reeds in, we're going to want these things here to feel like water. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. So you'll see me sometimes engage to the side of my brush a little bit to try to capture some things. And then even in this, I want to make sure that I'm getting a little bit of that. A little bit of light reflection. Or maybe there's a little more light right there. All right, let's call that a step. Next, we get to the fun part.
Oh, yeah.
Faraway flowers. And we'll talk about the concept of how we do these irises where we're not really painting every single petal. So for those brave souls that have hung in, and I really hope that you've hung in.
The brave ones.
The brave ones. Remember, paintings have layers, and a lot of times they come together and become the beautiful works of art that they are, especially with acrylic towards the end. Many of you are going to find that painting ponds and riverbank edges through this journey is your favorite thing to do. There's a whole segment of artists who, beyond Monet, who just love to paint this subject. One of the ways that I really love to do it is I very much enjoy the way that the flowers and the color from the flowers reflects in the water. But first, I've got to kind of build that up. So I'm going to take my white into my ultramarine blue and brown, and I'm going to do a couple things. Back here, kind of even maybe more blue than that. Back in the back here are a few flowers. And we're going to do very loose shapes. That could be kind of hard for you to do emotionally, but trust me, that's how you want to do them. And then as I come forward, I'm going to think about more specific shapes. Now, here's the thing. We're going to paint the overall shape of the flower, right? Not its individual petals. And then we'll come put in some highlights, and it will feel like those petals are there. So there's a little bit of this flower that's kind of a downward shape. And another little bit of a shape. Maybe something that goes up. So you want to pay attention to scale. How big is the flower? I'm going to bring a little petal there. And a hidden one here. Like poppies, irises are flowers that lend themselves to being painterly like nobody's business. I love when they're together. Clumped together is really fun for me. Is it really whoa?
Flowers. That, it's been so dark that now that I see the flowers, it's
super fun, right?
Yeah. It emerges.
Now, of course, we're going to have to put reeds and things that come up also over some of them. Some of them are distinctly in front. Some of them have reeds. So there's definitely an order of operation, I like to say. This one could be maybe even a little darker. Let's get a little more blue. When they're more in the grass, in the leaves, you may want to go a little more blue. And then this has kind of an upward little thing because these are bearded irises. Into the water here. And bear with me. If you'll remember, okay, if you didn't get to do the reflection, the number 2 of acrylic April, I highly recommend it because it really explains this concept.
Ooh.
But what we're going to do is we're going to turn the canvas to the side so that it's like this. You guys see that? And we're going to come out and find spots in the water that are reflected out from what we're seeing so that we kind of make sure that our reflections here are in a similar position. Like this reflection here would come out. Even if I'm wiggling my brush to say it's kind of a rippled reflection, it should still come down from the flower.
Gotcha.
As I'm trying to say. And sometimes it helps to, speak to those things in that way. So we see that one is down lower. So this one would be closer to the bank. And maybe there's some right here that are off. And I'm just doing little brush strokes. So this is how we get that. So my canvas is on its side. The river bank is here. The white flowers that I just painted are up here. Right. This one has one here. And what's wonderful about this is we're not really painting the shape of these because luckily the water's in motion. So we're just painting a reflection of them. We just want to make sure that we have the correct mirror. And I find for me, it's the easiest if I get the mirror in at this stage. So if this one is higher, these two, I had this one here and then a higher one right here. There we go.
There you go.
Not bad. So now you see, reflect. All those lessons are coming together. The skills are merging together, making a marriage of art skills. Yeah, maybe?
Yeah, I
hope so. Either way, we get to get into the purple pretty soon, and I always like that. But first, we got to get through the white. So we kind of work through that. Definitely maybe want to put some white peeking into the reeds here. And again, we will layer. We will not layer. We will layer. There's some nice ones up here. Again, it's so fascinating to me to paint the contour shape of it. Our brain wants to get into the petals.
Yeah.
And I say, stay back and be with the flowers. Be with the flowers. They know what they want to be. Don't tell them. They know themselves better than you do. All you can do is be their witness. That's a really weird and some strangely deep thought, isn't it?
I think, stop and smell the flowers.
These don't have any scent.
Right, and probably are very near like crocodiles or something else.
Well, maybe not crocodiles, but certainly something very specific.
I don't know.
Now, I can turn again and make sure that I've got some. I'm going to turn again to the side and make sure that I've got some little thoughts. Now, this would have one here, but what's great is that it is probably going to be all covered by leaves, so we're pretty good there. Okay, you're doing good. Now you're going to do a really fun thing. You're going to come back, take a little bit of your white. I'm going to even smidge in a bit of my yellow into it. Such a contrast. I want it to be nearly pure white. I'm getting it on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to come to a couple places. And where I see reflection, I'll just tap there a bit. Not too much. I'll put the reflection of that. So that these are parts of the petals that are maybe more in the sky. Not in the sky. That's not what I mean. In the light. They're all white. but some petals are always in the shade, especially with flowers that have these kinds of bends to them. But as you can see, as we talk about the different little elements of that, the flower itself starts to take shape as the iris that it is. This one has light almost only on the top. You don't want to paint out all your blue. The blue is often how you see the flower. The shadow of the flower is how you see the flower with the highlights. It's fun. It's fun.
Insightful.
It is insightful. It is fun. Maybe put one up here. Well, I want to put the purples in before I try to figure out where to tuck the white ones peeking out. Rinse out. Just make sure everything is okay. Dry off your brush so you don't have a drop. Guess what we have to do? I'm going to turn this to the side again.
Make sure you get them even.
Yeah. Well, I think of that. I just want to make sure that some of the brighter reflection is present in the water reflections.
Oh, yeah.
Because it would be. So on a day when we don't have a still mirror, that's a perfect reflection mirror world. Mm-hmm. When we have a slightly in motion, perhaps there's fish, something's just rippled the pond, the wind is blowing. That's how you would speak to that. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to get back into our greens. And start to put a few little blades. Because some of these are hidden in the blades. See how that tucks them back in?
I do.
And you can even reflect some of those green lines through there. I know. It's just kind of awesome.
It's really beautiful.
Very much like it. All right, let's call that a step because I think that's a lot to take in and we haven't even put the purple flowers in. Among the white irises, John, are a bunch of purple irises. And these are also beardeds. So how I'm going to get the purples, I'm going to take my dioxazine and probably my quin magenta together at first. I thought about the cad red a lot, but I think the quin and docs should be better. We'll see how they go. This one can be a bit darker. This will be my darkest color. And like before, paint the shape. Whatever it is, you want to paint that shape. That's what I'm going to be very carefully doing. So if there's little downward stems, I'm going to put that there. These are a little bit bigger than the whites. This one is maybe more of a solid fist, but other ones show the little beards coming off. And we really want to this little grouping here it would be very tempting to get into each individual flower, but we're not going to do that. Well, that's there. Now I will think about how I want to put in the kind of tucked flowers behind there, because there's a few tucked. I think that's peeking out. I kind of tuck those in, and that's going to be a little easier to see. When I have these in, I'm going to, again, turn on side. And this is a pretty dark reflection. We won't really see it till we pop it, but I want to make sure we have it there. Off our view, we're going to talk a little bit, though, maybe about a few of these.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see.
Because it will help balance our garden. And these might be just up here, just off of our viewer's view, just above the view line. And then put one here. Mm-hmm. And one here. Remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just want to catch the general sense of it. Where things are. Because luckily the water is kind of changing those reflections, moving them, breaking the light. Once I have that in, I'm going to take my magenta very strongly in there. You see how strong that is? Mm-hmm. Super strong magenta.
Ooh, it turned all purpley.
Yeah, and we're going to try to capture
just some little touches.
Yeah, the tops of where these flowers are perhaps a little more reflective, right? They've got more light on them, and the purple of them is showing maybe a little more. Again, I don't try to capture the individual petals. I just try to capture what is happening in the way that light is hitting them. Oftentimes, this is why I think artists just love bearded irises in a pond.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're such an abstract flower in a way, so messy. And they allow you to find so many little spots or things about them. I'm going to turn over on my side.
Okay.
Yeah, these are the irises we don't necessarily see. So there's this reflection. On these, I give you the last touch, which I think will be a little bit of my magenta and some of my kind of cad yellow and white. This is sort of a very warm pop.
Oh, wow.
Catch the tops of some of that. Too white. So we're just getting the glittering little tops. Flipping on the side with that mix. Touch that through. And here is an all-important finish. I'm going to take a little of my cad yellow. A couple places I'm going to touch that into the flowers. Because if you'll remember, often bearded irises have that sort of center. Not everywhere, just some. We're not trying to make the kind of centers that you might think of, like turning it to the side here. The kind of centers you might think of with regular flowers. We're trying to make the kind of centers need to be a little more of a touch. I don't want to get too heavy-handed, which I can do. And if you got too heavy-handed, you just put back a little bit of purple. So it's there, but it's light. It should be there, but light. And that little glow there, doesn't it really pull your eye and really just make you go, woo! All right, let's call it a step. The foreground, I sound like Dora. The foreground of the painting is more focal, brighter. The flowers have a smidge more detail, but not as much as you would expect. It's a lot of the same techniques. But to start this, I'm going to take my number 8 cat's tongue and I'm going to paint in some sort of deep green to build up from, which we should be familiar with. I think it's a good time to change water. My water is getting a little murky, as you can see. And when your water gets murky, it can dull your colors, even your greens. So it's good to change periodically. I'm going to come in with my phthalo green and burnt sienna. And just begin the process of making the overall structure of these they're irises. So if we remember, these kind of come forward and you're probably like, man, I'm painting out stuff I painted in, and you will. You will paint out stuff that you painted in a little bit. That is the nature, but it is one of the easier ways to tuck in those little peaks of color that you would have. In this style of scene, I'm taking the brush and I'm bringing it on the toe and I'm going flick, flick, flick. I think it's important to remember I change directions. My brush pressure is very light. You could use a round as well or an angle to get any of this. You just want something that gives you a nice crisp kind of line. And it's just going to come even through here. Sometimes I'll get to my dark. I added some ultramarine blue. Where I want it just to be a little bit darker. And that kind of creates the depth, the richness, the vibrancy. Nothing here is detailed enough to tell you that much about these irises. It's good to dry right here. Sometimes it's nice to have the green pick up and carry through, but sometimes you want to have a little more control. So we're dry right here, and then I'll add more grass. Once your canvas is dry and it's not going to be dropping a bunch of paint on you, I'm going to switch over to my number 4 round, and that's because I just want a finer brush stroke. I'm going to work into my yellow over into where my green and brown was, creating some lighter values. And much like in the back, I'm going to begin to create pieced out little implied leaf blades. This is really going to be about getting in and going through the greens, sometimes putting in the deep green, putting in lighter greens, and building it through. Try not to stress on the things that you're painting out, and try not to just casually paint things out, with no thought.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there needs to be some thought, and you'll see me pull bits of lighter leaf there, even though it's a bit farther away. And that's because, leaves, they catch light. As they go. And I'm going to just be dancing through the greens.
That just kind of creates that blended moving forward grasses from back to forwards.
Yeah, and I think grass has a lot of the blades of plants, this particular type of plant where it does have a bladed leaf, kind of this flat leaf structure. Mm-hmm. It does create a sense of movement in a way. If you think of it, it's not dissimilar to water and how it do. I think, I don't know why I became Frank all of a sudden, but I did. It's how an iris do. And you can see I'm just moving through my greens, adding yellow and white to lighten or I for sure on these little edges want to make lighter blades coming forward. And pulling more into phthalo and cad yellow, which is brighter. More noticeable. Through here, I can come through here. And again, just dance through where you want a blade to look like light is shining on it. It might have more yellow. It might have more white. If it's more deep in the patch of irises, it might go more into the phthalo green. You will have to spend a minute with this space to create a look that feels correct to you. I might come through and try to really highlight those leaves that might be maybe more in the sun.
I like all the little grasses.
I try to change direction and not have them all be the same direction. And I am trying to make sure that we have value changes that I want it to be darker at the water than in where the leaves are. I can deepen the leaves as I come back with the phthalo green, but at that edge, I definitely do want that contrast. I'm not really going to have the same browns and reds that I had over here because we're not going to see the bases of the plants where that drying out and coloration would happen. And you just want to give it a look every once in a while and make sure that what you've got is pleasing you. But remember, the goal of this is to complete the painting and to learn the techniques. Mm-hmm. So, especially in a series like this that's about building up techniques over time and giving you a concept of a particular type of painting, like water and landscapes, be easy with yourself in the individual projects and try to see your overall work. Some paintings will be your favorite. Somebody right now just discovered their favorite kind of painting. Mm-hmm. And somebody right now just discovered their least favorite kind of painting right now. So, and you guys are both right. It's valid either way, right? I would suggest to you, though, to face your least favorite types of paintings, to face those moments and get those skills. You don't have to stay in the paintings if you don't love them, but it's never leave yourself without a skill. I think it's one of the reasons why, and I did it initially for you guys where I went forward with cars, even though I don't really love painting cars, is because I didn't want you guys to be missing a skill. But through that process, I realized I was missing out as an artist by not just facing that skill and just dealing with it.
Yeah.
And so it is a good idea, I think, creatively for our overall health in our creative practice to face the skills that maybe we are not as fond of.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You know, doesn't mean that you won't spend your time in the skills that you are fond of. Be like, no, I really love painting these irises. I'm going to paint all the ponds with all the irises, all the wares, and then I'm going to go to the garden where Monet was and paint all the scenes in his garden and just do all the things that you can do if this is what you're into. That would be a fun retreat.
Yeah.
The world ever opens up again. And I like to pick up little bits of light in this for sure. So that what we have feels very forward. When colors are brighter and more saturated and the brush strokes are stronger and more defined, it will pull those elements forward.
Mm-hmm. The layers really make a difference here.
Yeah. You just got to do the layers. What I love about this is this particular one doesn't have like very many specific stems. So I don't have to, necessarily reserve out a stem and highlight and all of that. I just have to have the structure of the mass texture, which is great. And this is that. We has that. We may add some, we may take away some, but I think this is a lot to take in because you got to really get this in where it comes around. And you'll notice now that you have that curve. We didn't draw the curve, but the curve is implied, right? What is happening? This could have gone on this way, but it probably curves this way quite strikingly. And that's the thing about landscape painting is it's a little easier than roads sometimes to do. For this next part, make sure that your greens are dry because otherwise they'll pick up into your colors where you don't want them to be. And we're going to be putting little bits of colors here and there, little bits of thoughts of flowers here and there, similar to what we did in the back, but sometimes the strokes will be bigger or they will be more thought out. So I'm going to take a little bit, this time of maybe my purple and my phthalo blue, and I'm going to come here and add a little blue. Add these little peaks of a color in the reeds. Color in the reeds. But it is. And in this case, I might come through and try to let the paint sort of distantly catch that. I might grab a little of my pink over here. These are bits of flowers that are tucked in, and I'm just trying to, instead of painting reeds around them, I'm just tucking in little peaks of color that we might have had a couple of places. Let me get my maybe white on here and so a little different than on the far side where we put the stuff over them. Just little peaks. Right. Now through here we have some really fun flowers, and it is a little similar to what it was before, which is the white and ultramarine blue to start. I'm going to get my brush in there and make sure that it's got a nice flow. And again, paint the shape, not the individual petals so much.
Mm.
Now this one I might have to bring some reeds back for that go over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be too hard to paint between the reeds. Sometimes you have to paint things knowing that there's a moment where you might a little more blue right here. But notice that the blue in this case still reads as white once the highlights are on.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you a lot about how things. I want to put something here. I'm going to lose a little of my purple. That's okay. This one's worth it. A little downward. A little downward. Pretty large, noticeable shape.
It's interesting how you're suggesting to stay in the shape and avoid the petals.
Yeah. Well, and what it is, there's like, if you look at the contours of the flower, there's an overall shape.
Mm-hmm.
You paint that, you don't get caught in the petals, then you paint the highlights and colors and values that you see, you will end up with your flower. That's inevitable. And I'll let those have a little kind of moment there. And we don't have to do reflections. So I can actually come in and say, I've got a little bit of this periwinkle happening here, which I'll take my Doc's purple and a little my phthalo blue. And we're going to put these little spears up. Sometimes the colors of things are not yet realized. Maybe this is something that's going to bloom later. We don't see it yet. We don't see it right now. And grab a little of the white. Right. Highlight a little of the side with the phthalo blue and white. Maybe even come with a little bit of maybe darker phthalo blue or purple. Just trying to make sure that our little peaks of blue, right? I'm going to grab some green right here. Always sort of fun to be like, how are you here? You're like a little bud. And they're like, yeah, we're a little bud. What do you want? And we paint these little blue things here. It gives what we're doing time to dry, right? When we paint other elements of things, it does give what we're doing time to dry. And I don't even know I want to paint that flower out with reeds because I really want some focal flowers.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm going to come in. There's some pink here, some pink and white. I want to get some pink and white and put it a couple places on these petals. That was the quinacridone and the cad yellow and white. Might even put some right here in the background. Look at that.
Wow.
These are very focal. Just a little bit of that there. I like it. It looks real good. Now I'm going to take a little of my phthalo blue and my titanium white. And I really want just my phthalo blue and titanium white. And I'm going to put them in a couple of places. It is different than my ultramarine.
You can see it.
Yeah, because there's a slight turquoise to it. So it still has that there. And then I'm going to come back with white. It's quite thick on my brush. Doesn't have to be. And capture a few of the white highlights on the flowers. Like this petal has some, and then, you know, where does it have those highlights? Because that's what helps it look like it's got the shape that it does. And as you can see, we put those whites on there. Oh, they just really brighten up, don't they?
Yeah.
Quite right there. And because those are so bright, they pull forward. I feel. Getting the little pinks in there. Little kisses of that. Shows a particular type of flower. And then guess what? Maybe a little red and yellow, but back into that warm center of the flower. Not everyone has them, but they do have them. Like that. And come in with some real yellow there. I like that very much. I think it's a good idea to come back with some little purple and white and make sure that we've got little tucked bits of color peeking through. Because they would be. Little strokes, bringing the flowers back around here. All right. And we have one last real kind of, I think we have a couple last little tweaks, but I think we're really close to done. But look at that.
Wow.
Just beautiful little flowers around a riverbank. Green on green on green on green.
You're recording. So
the last thing I want to do is put some like reflections and detailing in the water. And I find if I want to make a very horizontal stroke, I actually do that better vertically. So again, I'm going to turn it to the side. It's just because that's where I have a stronger stroke. And I'm going to go ahead and get some white. And where I had these flowers, I'm going to make sure that there's some bright, kind of more dashy little reflections. I don't mind if it's the blue and white. I just want it to be kind of bright. And also, I want to make sure that there's just some of these coming through. Blue in it, that's okay, but I just want to make sure that I've got some in the water showing that there's just a little more kind of light dancing across the water. Sometimes light does dance across the water. So it's not dissimilar to what we would see, you know, in the corridors of light, the way little sparkles happen, or again, water, we're always painting the light, the reflection, the wind, the environment around it, because water itself is see-through. Every once in a while, I think it's a good idea to turn it and check. And when you have a nice reflection, you'll know you're there.
Mm-hmm.
I put some phthalo blue in here. Just to speak a little bit about the sky that could be there. Check that. And I really like that little patch of that. I might come in with a little bit of white. Tap out little moments. Make sure you've got balance around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you need a little more white somewhere for focus. So where focus ends up being in a painting is where you have a great deal of contrast. You can try to do something where you make one object focus. But what happens when you have something where there's a lot of patterning and color, you get to play with where that might be a little bit. Like we have this sort of run of the purple in here, but we have the white bringing it back up and the reflections keeping us, you know, aware of the water. And I think that that's a good thing. It's a good thing at this stage, too, to make sure you've got nice light greens that are really popping the eye around the edge here. So that it feels like light.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm just coming on my number 4 round, is catching some of this. So this is the phthalo green, cad yellow, and a little white. And I'm making some just stronger strokes of that. To help this also pull forward. Because it does. When it's brighter, it will pull forward. Anywhere you think you need those lighter colors where something is reflecting in the back, this is that time to put it in to show that it's happening. Because it will a few places, and it's powerful stuff. So you just look around and you find those little spots and add reflections. Maybe some of the leaves have them. And you shade a few of those out. Because if you think about it, leaves turn even, don't they? Mm-hmm. In the light. And so some of them will be quite bright in the light and have like maybe, you know, wipe off and get some green. So playing with that. And when you have what you feel like is a nice little dance of light, sometimes I will tap out just a little bit of color here and there. Just playing with the color. Little spots, little dust motes. Dancing. I think I'm good. I think I'm ready to sign, John.
That's
we really
fantastic.
Took a journey into a pond. What a nice and lovely pond we got to visit today. And everything is growing so beautiful in this garden. So even if your garden is frozen over like mine is right now, at least you had a lovely day, you know, in it. I've got some nice light green here that I'll take to sign in my bottom corner. I say this a lot, but I'll say it again. I like to make sure that my signature, like if I put my signature to the side here like this, it will pull less from the overall composition. And the reason is I want people to know my signature is there. But it's not the most important part of the painting. The painting is the important part of the painting.
Yep.
So you want it visible and present, but not in a way that's so overpowering that the whole composition is about your signature and everybody's just looking at it, you know. And a lot of artists might disagree. They might be like, no, the whole business is about you and it's got to be about you. And that's totally valid too, because this is art. Mm-hmm. I hope that you enjoyed your visit, the first visit to the pond. I think this is the first one we've done on the channel like this, so I'm excited to share this with you. I hope you will come back tomorrow where we're going to continue to build on these skills of landscape and water and how it all plays together to create a beautiful art experience for you, the painter. And I'm pumped for tomorrow. Are you pumped for tomorrow?
I'm ready.
Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. And I want to see you at an easel really soon. Bye-bye.